It's Christmas, a time of caring for the old, the dispossessed, the insecure, the poor, the war-weary. And what are we to do about it? Religion takes a charitable approach, but that is not the role of religion. Religion's true duty is to play the philosophical key role in the political and economic economy. And what we're going to find out here in the greatest zeitgeist of bars in Covent Garden, Brown's, upstairs, is a study in philosophy, politics, and economics. And I'm going to take you on a short journey. But first, what is philosophy, politics, economics? Well, you may have an ulcer and go to the doctor. And you might say, well, I've got a hole in my stomach, so what? The doctor might say you're suffering from stress, and you'll wonder, how does a psychological problem impact anatomically? And the answer is simple. Stress causes physiological acid release. Acid causes anatomical ulcers. And so we see a link between the psychological, the physiological, and the anatomical. What you have to appreciate is that philosophy is the psychology of society, economics is the physiology of society, and politics is the anatomy of society. And so from the philosophical, we impact on the political via the economic. Come upstairs and I'll show you how it works. 2,500 years ago, Phoenician traders arrived at the shores of Europe carrying two things: tangible, spices, and intangible, the concept of one and zero. The natives were delighted with the spices, but the concept of one and zero didn't ring too true. One minute the Phoenician traders told them 1 plus 0 equals 1. The next, 1 and 0 is 10. They're conning us, cried the natives. And the word zero in Semitic languages is sifar. So the natives began to perceive that which is negative, mischievous, as bad. And the concept of zero developed a bad rap. And so in the English language, cipher took on a negative connotation, deceiver, decipher. And the word luz for light took on a positive. Lucy, lucky, the key to light. And so luz cipher, the concept of one and zero, became a concept of the moral switch. The key thing I want you to appreciate is that the role of the church is not to take on the duties of charity for the poor, the old, the dispossessed, and the homeless, as much as we are led to believe that that is the duty of the church or any religion. The role of the church is to take control of its philosophical position, in control of the moral switch from luz to cipher, to control the economy and the politics of society in the manner that we discussed downstairs outside, that stress psychologically controls the physiology and anatomy of the body. The most important thing I want you to understand is this: Lucifer is not a person, it is a moral concept. And in the hands of the church, the auditor, the thermostat of moral society, it has a duty to take control from that position. Lucifer is not a person. So what does that mean? We recognize that the role of the church is at the philosophical level. The role of the church is to impact on society politically via the economy. In other words, our psychological stress transmits itself physiologically to the anatomical level. But what's the mechanism? How exactly does the philosophical level transmit and convert itself from an intangible to the more tangible economic level? Well, I'm about to demonstrate it here in a courtroom in Brown's. I'm going to represent a mythical client who is being pursued by the Inland Revenue Department for taxes. And I'm going to use the test of justice. What is justice? Justice is what's due to you is due to you. What does that mean? Well, put simply, if you have a hangover when you drink and you don't have a hangover when you don't drink, then it's pretty conclusive that hangovers are caused by alcohol. Let's extend that test and logic to the defense of my client in this court. My lord, the test for justice is what's due to you is due to you. This is a court of law, my lord. It is a court of justice. Will my client not receive his just dues? The test of justice is passed by my client. In his presence, there are profits. In his absence, there are no profits. Likewise, labor and capital. When labor withdraws its labor, there are no profits. When capital withdraws its shares, there are no profits. In their presence, there are profits. In their absence, there are no profits. And the test of justice is what's due to you is due to you. My lord, if the Public Revenue Department seeks revenue for the public, then they must go where and to whom they can demonstrate that the absence of the public will create an absence of that revenue. It isn't with my client, my lord. That is unjust. My lord, the Public Revenue Department seeks revenue for the public. Then in the name of justice, they must go where revenue ebbs and flows in the presence of the public, not the individual. My lord, let the Public Revenue Department go where revenues rise and fall with the presence of the public. A holiday resort in the summer has higher revenues, higher rents with the ebb and flow of the public. In winter, as the public goes, the rents fall. The sunny side of Oxford Street has higher rents than the shady side. Mad Dogs and Englishmen. The footfall on the sunny side is higher than the shady side. That difference in footfall is represented by the estate agent's demand for higher rents. And since this is a court of law, my lord, and since this is a court of justice, and since the test of justice is what's due to you is due to you, and if the test is if you can demonstrate that in your presence it appears and in your absence it disappears, then my lord, I think I have successfully defended my client, the individual wage earner, and I have directed you, my lord, towards the true source of public revenue, the landlord. I wasn't successful. And the reason I wasn't successful is because the court of justice is not compelled under a moral condition of sifa to ensure that justice is dispensed. Justice exists under moral conditions. Under immoral conditions, you get injustice. The Public Revenue Department seeks revenue for the public, but it, in the name of justice, should only be able to take it from the public, from those for whom it's due, shall it take that which is due. But it seeks public revenue from the individual. And the reason it takes public revenue from the individual is because the switch, the moral switch, Lucifer, is on off. If the moral switch at the philosophical level was on loose, then the conditions, the thermostat, would set the conditions of society on moral right. Under such a condition, the court of justice would not be able to take what is due to the individual and give it to the public. In effect, taxation is nothing but a fine for no crime. The job of a barrister is thirsty work. I often ask for a Coke and I end up with a Pepsi. And the reason for this is the name Coca-Cola has become generic for fizzy drinks. The same has happened with vacuum cleaners. You ask for a Hoover and you can end up with a Dyson. You saw in the court of law that there are two methods of raising public revenue. On the left-hand side of the court, if you raise revenue from the factors of production that require effort, it is called taxation. That's what the word in the English language means. To tax, oh, I find something taxing means I find it increases effort. The method of raising public revenue from the right-hand side of the court, from the landlord, from rents, is economic. It is not burdening effort, it is effort minimizing. That's what economics means. Why has the public not been made aware of the fact that they have an alternative method of raising public revenue? Well, in exactly the same way that when you ask for a Coke, you can end up with any brown fizzy drink, or when you ask for a Hoover, you can end up with a Dyson. Neoclassical economists did exactly what the marketing department of Hoover and Coca-Cola did. Neoclassical economists, on the behest of landlords, co-opted and genericized the name of public revenue. They made the word taxation generic for public revenue in the way Hoover is generic for vacuum cleaners or Coke for fizzy drinks. As a consequence, you, the public, are not even aware that there is an alternative method of raising public revenue. That being as it is, what difference does it make? Well, I'll explain. I'll explain to you what difference it makes whether public revenue is raised from effort or effortlessness, from taxation or economics. And I'll do so with a little story. It's Christmas, so I'll start with a parable. Once upon a time, there were 3 camels. There was baby camel, mummy camel, and daddy camel. "Don't burden your camels so much," said a wise old man. "Shut up," said the wicked camel driver. "I want as much as I can from my camels." And off he sets. So that little cartoon you saw by Jennifer Ann Haugen explains the most important concept in economics. It's called the concept of the economic margin. Now, the marginal operator is anyone who is only just breaking even. It's not necessarily a small mom and pop store. It could be a particular operation of a major mining company or a route for an airline. But whatever it is, if it's only just worthwhile from the investment perspective, it's called a marginal operation. And what you saw happen in that cartoon was the burdening of the marginal operator, the baby camel, as we'll call it from now on, causes the marginal operator to go out of business. It's not worthwhile. So baby camel collapses. But the problem is, when baby camel collapses, what happens? The camel driver had to split the load of baby camel between mummy and daddy camel. And what happened when he split the load between mummy and daddy camel? Mummy camel was kind of managing, but now, under the split burden of baby camel, she too goes. And then what happens? Daddy camel is forced to carry everything, and he goes. And that domino effect, that crashing of industry, is what is caused by burdening the marginal operation. And that is the effect of taxation on the marginal operator. And this is why we have a choice, whether or not we go from taxation for public revenue or to rent for public revenue. Because when we go for rent from public revenue, when we go and collect public revenue from the rent, the business is not burdened. Our camels stand erect, not carrying the effort or the extra effort due to taxation. And so they march on, as the wise old man said, don't burden your camels so much. But what does this mean socially? And what is the link between that and the church? Let's have a look. Here's a spreadsheet for a government budget. It's hyper simplified, but you'll get the general idea. Let's consider the government choosing a public revenue system. It has two options, as we saw. It has rent or taxation. Let's see what happens socially when the government chooses taxation for its public revenue. Immediately, in the first year, the marginal operation collapses. But it's worse than baby camel, mummy camel, daddy camel. Remember, the marginal operation was employing people. And here we see no one employed in year one. But after year one, when baby camel collapses, people employed by baby camel become unemployed. And not only does mummy camel and daddy camel have to carry the burden of baby camel, they now have to carry the extra burden of unemployment. So you see the unemployment cell increases plus the cost of unemployment in year two. But it gets worse than that. Unemployed people don't sit at home and twiddle their thumbs. They end up on the Jeremy Kyle show. They end up in prison. And so you see in year three, our prison numbers go up and our cost of prison goes up. And so on and so forth. So that by year two, when mummy camel's gone, the second generation of industries and marginal operations goes, the cost to the government increases. Well, what's the government to do? It can't continue to allow all the camels to collapse. So what it does is two things. It can't raise the revenue by taxation anymore, so it borrows. And when it borrows, it creates a debt. And that money that it borrows from the banks has to be paid back with an interest. But what happens? The government can never tax enough to kill daddy camel. It can never tax the Starbucks and the major companies, because if it overburdens daddy camel, there'll be no employment at all in society, and you can only imagine where that will lead. So it lays off the daddy camels, the Starbucks, and raises all its revenue from the baby and mummy camels, and uses that to pay the interest on the money it borrows from the banks to pay for goods and services, which is essentially the side effects of the method by which it raises public revenue. And we saw in the court of law that this is only possible, this chaotic method of raising public revenue is only possible because the church, the thermostat, the philosophical thermostat that permits that chaotic method of raising public revenue is on off, is on cipher. But it's worse than that. What happens to these unemployed people? They end up in prison. As explained, the cost goes through the roof. Eventually, politicians arise who exploit racial divisions. Soon, society fractures along racial lines. And then it gets worse. Eventually, this chaotic state of affairs can't continue. And what happens is, and I'm sure you've played Monopoly with your siblings at Christmas and they're losing and they get angry and they kick the table to start a new game. Eventually, this grinds to a halt. The arithmetic just doesn't add up. The debt becomes equal to the GDP, even with the mollycoddling of the Starbucks, the daddy camels. So what happens? The table has to be cleared. And how do you clear a Monopoly board? War. And so you see, when the philosophical switch is on cipher, is on off, we suffer. The role of the church isn't to come and pray over the consequences of its abrogation of duty, but rather to go to the top and switch on the light to loose. What happens when it switches the light on to loose? We saw in the court of law that the Public Revenue Department can no longer, in the name of justice, raise revenue from the individual. What does that mean? That means, under the test of justice, public revenue can be, as we saw, raised from the landlord, raised from rent. What does that mean? It means Mummy Camel isn't overburdened, nor is Baby Camel, so that the industries thrive. What does that mean? That means that society isn't under the hock of politicians exploiting racial and social divisions. What does that mean? That means there is plenty of employment for everybody, and society flourishes. Here is the spreadsheet, the budget spreadsheet for a society raising its public revenue from the rent. You see that in year one, its public revenue is raised from rent. The important thing isn't how much revenue it raises. The important thing is it doesn't burden the marginal operator and cause a domino effect. And so you have no unemployment, you have no cost of unemployed, you have no people in prison, you have no cost of prison, you have no deficit, you have no borrowing, and you have no debt to pay. And so you see how we move from a social hell to a social heaven simply by toggling the moral switch, which allows the defense of the method by which public revenue is raised to impact on society. Now, we've covered quite a lot. If philosophy, politics, economics is new to you, don't be scared. Because in any system, just as when you buy a mobile phone, you go to the phone shop, there's usually a very geeky character who goes into iOS 8 and Apple and Jelly Bean operating systems, etc. But all you want to know is, where is the on-off button, the lus cipher, and where is the output? You don't concern yourself with the internal workings of the phone. All you want to know is, where's the on-off button and where's the output? All of the detail is contained in a black box. All of the operating system is in that black box, and open to you is the on-off button and the output. Well, we'll do the same with this. We will take a black box and we will take all of this and put it in the black box so that all we will have is an on-off button and an output. But obviously these camels and Big Ben and the Monopoly table can't fit into this little box. But nor could all the valves and capacitors fit into this phone. What happened was the details of how a phone works were shrunk onto a microchip, and that was put into the phone. And we'll do the same thing, because these spreadsheets, as you saw earlier, represent everything that's happening on the monopoly board in our little country. So let us take our microchip representation of that, our spreadsheets, our Excel spreadsheets, and let us fold them up. And place them inside the black box. Now, that's our operating system. All we need now is an on-off switch. Here's our on-off switch. There's our operating system. And what's our output? Our output is a happy society or a sad society. So what we see is, rather than concern ourselves with all of this detail, let us simply understand that whether society is happy or sad depends on whether the operating system is activated by a switch that is on or off. When the moral switch is on, then society is happy. When the moral switch is off, society is sad. Everything that we have discussed up to this point, like the operating system on a computer or a mobile phone, is in this black box. How it works, how the capacitor works, how the residual electrons work, all of that is in this black box. You know where the on-off switch is, and you know where the output is. And that's all we need to go on with from this point forward. So the question is, why doesn't the church simply flick the moral switch and take us in one simple move from the Jeremy Kyle show to the Waltons in one flick of the moral switch? The answer, I'm afraid, is both painful and frightening. You see, the church is on the inside. In B-movie tradition, the church has been co-opted into the racket. Any fraud requires that the auditor is involved, and the church is the moral auditor of society. The landlords and the bankers who benefit from taking public revenue and servicing the government debt rope in the church as the inside man necessary for any crime. The government has no option but to spend its days euphemizing away the consequences of a chaotic method of raising public revenue. One minute they're telling us they need to raise public revenue by taxation. The next minute they're telling us that they need to destroy sugar, alcohol, and cigarette consumption by taxation. One has to wonder what sense of humor they have that suggests that they will raise public revenue by the same method that they seek to destroy other industries. These two jelly beans represent the movie The Matrix. The Matrix is all about this: philosophy, politics, economics, achieving social change from the philosophical via religion. What is the matrix? A matrix is a collection of cells. A beehive is a matrix. And so is an Excel spreadsheet, a collection of cells. Morpheus is Greek, morph for change, and us, change us. How do we change us? How do we go from our present social condition to another? Via Trinity, via religion. When Trinity meets neo, which is Greek for the new, he incongruously for a nightclub says to Trinity, are you the Trinity that hacked the IRS database? Yes, she says, in recognition of her role as religion. That was a long time ago. Neo is referred to as the one, lus. Morpheus, seeking change for us, says to Trinity, he is the one. Says to religion, go to the one. The nemesis, the baddie, is cipher, zero. How do you interchange between two spreadsheets on a computer? You need a mouse to switch. Who are the two characters between neo and cipher? They're called mouse and switch. Neo, at the start of the film, is dreaming, and he approaches his boss, who is called Reinhard. It's a metaphor for hard heart. The name of his company is Cortec, which is a reference to the cortex, the part of the brain for decision making. In other words, we're being told that we have to make a hard-hearted decision to switch from the old to the new, to change us. And then Neo wakes up. When the interest on the loan is greater than the government can repay, the game of Monopoly turns into a bloody game of chess. The dying is done by those who never played on the playing fields of Eton. Landlords and bankers win wars. The church prays for the victims. The angel has fallen. The lights have gone out. Cucullus non facit monachum.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind